Hi, folks. In our contemporary story for the week, in relation to our sort of human and emotional machine connection technology, we are reading Charles Yu's Standard Loneliness Package. Now, this story was published in 2012, so it's only 12 years old. There is a case to be made that the cultural context is different at the time than it was 12 years ago, certainly. However, it is not so far removed that I think we need to spend a whole lot of time addressing that in your preview video. So instead, I want to talk about some things to think about just sort of philosophically and interpretively as you're reading, thematically, as well as how this connects to the other stories that we are looking at for the week as a sort of synthesis of our theme. So in terms of how the story connects to the machine stops. So one of the things that we're dealing with here is certainly relates to isolation, how we define the human experience. And in the machine stops, you have this sort of cultural homogeneity that takes place, meaning everybody, we lose a lot of diversity by virtue of having this system, this machine in place. Everybody's experience is almost exactly the same. And that is something that, as we move forward with technology, people are concerned about. As a matter of fact, there is a theory in linguistics called the globalization of dialect, because of things like TikTok and YouTube and the fact that we can hear, talk, see, speak to each other all the time, that is sort of losing our individual dialects that we have, that we may have had in place more firmly before technology. Now, that's a different topic, but in terms of individuality and unique experience, there is a case to be made in the case of the Standard Loneliness Package that isolation and human connection is part of the human experience that, it is missing or is manipulated by the ability to outsource your negative emotions. There's also a case to be made that much like memory become a defining part of your identity. Negative emotions, strife, bad experiences also inform upon who you are in both good and bad ways, right? Now, the idea of trauma and healing from the past and understanding how to cope with those sorts of things. This is something we have a lot more language for today than perhaps even we did in 2012. However, these are things that, nobody looks forward to or enjoys particularly. But philosophically, there's a case to be made that without the negative, you can't experience the positive. Without sorrow, you can't have joy. And whether or not that's the case, I look forward to seeing what you all think in the text in your comments. But this question of that part of our identity is something very present. As far as it connects to Philip K. Dick's We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, that story deals with the manipulation of memory, and memory is such a foundational part of our identity. And, if I ask you to rifle through sort of your catalog of memory, I would be willing to bet that a lot of those memories are taken up by, joyous, uplifting moments, but then there are also a lot of memories that are taken up by those negative, uncomfortable, the things that we would like to outsource, as it were. Those often become stored perhaps even more strongly than the good ones. There's the old, remembering something embarrassing you did 20 years ago. Those are the things that really stick with us, right? And the idea of manipulating negative emotions is in many ways the same as manipulating a memory or manipulating a negative experience. And there's a question to be raised as to whether our ability to outsource those things or sort of placate those emotions or not feel those emotions takes away a fundamental aspect of what it is that makes us us. There's also a question to be asked here about whether it diminishes our capacity for empathy, right? One of the things in science fiction and in fantasy that often is sort of that distinguishing factor between machine and human, one of the things that makes us uniquely, human, is the capacity for empathy. And that's one of the reasons that so many stories play with that idea about whether we can empathize with, a creature made of human corpses in the case of Frankenstein, or whether we can empathize with, Ipecac, a machine that, the machine that he is. Those sorts of things are our capacity for empathy is arguably a uniquely human thing. However, our capacity for empathy, by some tokens, would require our ability to feel or understand the way that others have felt. And if we're not experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion, then arguably our capacity for empathy, sort of evaporates. So as a final thought to leave you with as you head into Charles Yu's Standard Loneliness Package, so we're reading fiction, genre fiction, and that's all primarily what I teach is fiction. And oftentimes people say, well, but it's not real. So why would I want to read about something that is not real when I could read about something that is real? And for that, I think this is an interesting piece of science for you to be aware of. Studies have shown that reading about an experience, even a fictional one, even a science fiction one, activates the same parts of our brain as when we experience that experience. So essentially, the capacity to see or understand the world through other people's eyes, which is one thing that fiction allows you, or that reading allows you in general, is one of the things that develops empathy in people. And I think it's interesting to think about in terms of this story, is that if we are outsourcing the things that we don't want to feel, if that diminishes our capacity to empathize with others who do. I look forward to hearing what you all have to say about this one.